Hello and welcome to our review of the Master Grade Shining Gundam. So right out of the box, you're going to get the Master Grade Shining Gundam, 2 beam effect parts for the beam swords, and 3 additional pairs of hands, the Shining Finger, the grip for holding the sword, as well as a karate chop, 2 pieces for the face mask for transforming into the super mode, and a cream colored Domon Kashu. You will also get the aforementioned beam swords, which are basically beam sabers, and they do come with effect parts. One for the long one, fits in pretty solidly, and one for the short one. Pretty simple, basically they're beam sabers. So putting the beam swords on the Gundam is pretty simple. You're going to use the little channel here on the beam sword and slot it into the waist here, and after you do the big one, just do the little one. And it's pretty rock solid. So transforming the core fighter is a bit more cumbersome. You're going to need to lift up this entire piece, but I can only use the cockpit right now, so I'll use a pair of tweezers to help. And like so, and once you do that, this will attach very nicely into the back of the Gundam. And there you go. Them all put together, and I have to say, despite being almost 2 decades old, this kit came out in 2002, it still gives a very Master Grade vibe. It doesn't have all the crazy panel lines and tick marks that modern Master Grades are known for, but it has that Master Grade kind of sleek design. The proportions seem very right. It's, sleek and slender as opposed to the more bulky, older high grades. So here's a quick little spin around. As you can see, all the color apps are there. I really like the blue that they used. It's a bit more saturated and darker than the normal Gundam blue, but I think it suits this kit very well. The only real complaints I have would be the fact that these black color apps on the front skirts and the ankles are provided with stickers. Granted, they are kind of a glossy sticker, so it almost looks kind of like plastic because it reflects light in a similar way. But I think that on a modern day Master Grade, these wouldn't be stickers, and it's something that I'll just have to paint over. But articulation is where this kit should really shine. This is one of the first Master Grades to include an inner frame, and that really helps with its posability. This inner frame uses a lot of screws, which really helps make this kit very stable and very rock solid. So this probably has a lot more playability than your average model kit. The head is just on a simple ball joint. It doesn't really allow for a 360-degree spin, but it does give you pretty much all the angles that you'd want when you remember that there is actually someone in there piloting, and the Gundam is just mimicking its movements. The torso is pretty impressive. It can rock side to side a very decent amount. And while there aren't going to be any crazy ab crunches like modern day Master Grades, you will be able to lift it up quite far and have the Gundam look up at something. And sadly, it's not capable of a 360-degree bend, but again, on a mobile fighter, I don't think that makes much sense. So onto the arms, you will be getting a very solid 180 bend from the elbow. The wrists here are going to rotate 360 degrees, no problem. These fists will pop out very easily because they're not actually made of the typical plastic. This is kind of a rubbery feel and allows it to be plugged in and out interchangeably very easily. The entire arm, of course, also rotates 360 degrees, and this is one of the first Master Grades to include the shoulder gimmick where it allows the entire shoulder to pull out for more dynamic poses. And for the transformation, the shoulder will be able to pop up to reveal more of the vents, and the front arm guard here will also pull forward to cover the arm. Now the backpack really doesn't have much movement. There is going to be one big thruster here that can move up and down, and the little vents here can slide around ever so slightly. So onto the lower half of the Gundam, the front skirts will flip up and allow for a very solid 90-degree kick, as you'd expect from a martial art Gundam. The back skirts don't flip out quite as much, but you can still get a decent swing back on the legs. Now, for the side skirts, they basically don't swing out at all, so Shining Gundam won't be doing any 180-degree splits anytime soon. Now, for the actual leg itself, you'll get a very nice 180-degree bend. I really like how on the inner frame, there's 2 pistons, so one set up here and another one down there. Looks very nice when you actually bend it. Onto the ankle itself, there's a wide range of movement. Very, very impressive. And the surprising part is because there's a lot of screws in there, it doesn't feel very wobbly at all. Now this ankle armor will move up ever so slightly up and down. The part here will slide open for the super mode, revealing more boosters. The ankle piece here will also move down for the super mode, and likewise parts of the feet do move around for the super mode. Now the very soles of the feet is interesting in that it's the same material as the spare V-fin, the yellow V-fin, and the fists. It's kind of a rubbery material. I think this is to help it have more traction when it's posing on the ground, if it's like, just standing on one leg or something like that. While the Shining Gundam can't do the standard looking down the beam rifle pose by virtue of not having a beam rifle, it does hold a very basic sparring pose very well. And while he can't quite put his arm entirely behind his back, he does pull off the Rock Lee pose very stylishly. Equipping the beam sword is pretty trivial. It's just a matter of sliding the handle into the hand. Again, these are made from the rubbery material, so it should be held together very solidly with just friction. And because the hands are positioned in a way that he's kind of tilting the beam swords forward, you should have no problem getting it into any kind of pose you want. What does beg a question how he draws the bigger beam sword when it's under the little one. I think these karate chop hands really add something, because while they're similar to the typical expressive dynamic hands, they're fully closed, so it does give off a more martial arts vibe compared to the more aggressive open hands of typical master grades. Now normal mode is all fun and all, but the main draw of G Gundam is definitely the super and hyper modes, and for the master grade you're going to pull off the front plate to reveal the iconic red face. And then using the given parts, changing parts, you're just going to plug them in like so. And that gives the impression that the face vents actually opened. And now on the back here, there's a lot of yellow parts and fins that you can just slide forward. And voila! The arm transformation is pretty simple. You're just going to raise the shoulder, and there's a nice little click to know that slides into place. And for the forearm guard, just slide them forward so that it covers the fist. The legs are pretty simple. Just slide open the calves, and you'll expose a bunch of golden thrusters. The feet are surprisingly the most complicated part. You're going to bend the heel down, pull down the front of the foot so that it matches, and finally pull down this part of the ankle guard. So here in its super mode, it definitely looks a lot more intimidating with all the panels sliding around and exposing all the vents and whatnot. I know in the show these yellow parts are meant to be gold, but here it's the exact same yellow as the yellow pieces on the head and the chest. But overall, I have to say it's a very simple transformation, but because it's simple, it's going to hold on very well, and it shouldn't get in the posing much at all. But now it looks like something is missing. So the best parts about the Shining Gundam has to be its shining fingers, and here it's replicated using a clear green plastic that's kind of see-through but also kind of glowing. As you can see, you get one for each hand, and they plug in very easily. Has no problem mimicking the box art. And double shiny fingers. Though I have to say, it kind of just looks like jazz hands. So in canon, the Master Grade Shining Gundam is a 16-meter tall Gundam, and here he is next to the Master Grade Wing Gundam, which is also a 16-meter tall Gundam. As you can see, their head heights are just about right. And not to bully the Shining Gundam, but here he is next to the Master Grade Hainu Verka, which is a 20-meter tall Gundam. So now for just my final thoughts on the Master Grade Shining Gundam. So I'm pleasantly surprised by just how good this kit is, especially considering it's almost 2 decades old. The inner frame does wonders for the mobility, especially in the upper body. You'll have no problem getting it into all kinds of cool dynamic kung fu poses. But the mobility in the lower half of the Gundam is a bit limited, specifically in the waist and the hip area. it doesn't have any of the mechanisms that modern grade Master Grades have to do really dynamic hip swings and kicks and whatnot. So getting it into a dynamic kick pose will be pretty difficult, if not impossible, just because the hip itself really isn't that mobile. But for getting it just into a cool standing pose like this, the legs definitely do its job. No complaints there. And another thing I've mentioned that I really like is just how solid the kit is stability-wise, and that's mainly because there's screws all over the inner frame. So this kit is very sturdy, won't loosen up over time. Even for like the polycaps and the wrists, they use the special rubber plastic for the hands so that it won't wear down the polycaps quite as fast. So in that sense, it definitely has a more solid construction than a lot of even modern Master Grids. There are some cons. There are some small things like the fact that these black color apps have to be stickers. They're not exactly deal breakers for me, and because I'm going to paint this kit eventually, but judging it by a modern grade Master Grade standards, definitely not something you'd expect to see. It having a parts former for the transformation, especially for the head, is kind of understandable, but I imagine on a modern day Master Grade, that kind of thing would also just be a typical transformation. So all in all, I think this kit is pretty solid for what it is, a two-decade-year-old kit, but it definitely looks like a Master Grade, and for a very cheap price, I believe this retails for around $25 US, is definitely a steal. So if you're a fan of the Shining Gundam, I'd say definitely go for the Master Grade. It's a very solid kit despite being very old, and it's a very quick and simple build. So yeah, thank you for watching my review of the Master Grade Shining Gundam. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.